Oh my goodness. 8 years. I just got to say, Hanselman popped in with like 2 seconds left on the countdown. That was amazing.
Like a pro.
What do I need to, I'm looking at the .NET Twitter. What do I need to retweet to say that we're here?
The latest ASP.NET.
ASP.NET. We should put on
ASP.NET.
the .NET one too.
I know. So I still can tweet from the ASP.NET one. I still can probably technically tweet from .NET, but I'll maybe get a stern.
You don't
warning.
have like some Power Automate system that just automatically tweets from the .NET account when we go live or something?
You would think. No.
I would think.
Yeah. So it's funny. The .NET account there's like all kinds of controls and things you have to like processes.
You're making it hard. I just got a note that we hit 300,000 Twitter followers.
That's pretty cool.
That's crazy.
That is cool.
Cool.
Wow.
Someone said, John, that the ASP.NET Community Stand-Up, the highlight of it was not all the great and amazing technical content that you've been putting on, but rather Damian and you and I just messing around with crap on our desks. That was kind of the feedback from last week.
Yeah, it was I got that tweet over the weekend. It was Scott Sauber, and he was very clear to say nothing against the current iterations of the show. You know, it's great, but he kind of misses the early days of the stand-up when, you know, we would spend 15 minutes waiting for the technology to work, or just we would use it as our weekly catch-up call.
Yeah.
So as such, I have two possible opportunities for topics in the opening here, if that's okay.
Wonderful.
Okay.
Yeah.
First one, I just got back from vacation, and I went to the mailbox, and I picked up the mail that the Postal Service held for me. Mm-hmm. So I thought we could do some unboxings and see what crap has come.
This is like what show is that where they would?
I have no idea what's there. Could be good.
That makes sense because I know you're selling a bunch of stuff at the moment, Scott, on Facebook. So you've made room in your life for new things to come in and look at the lovely
I have declared to Damian in the past that I am a minimalist, and Damian has called BS on that.
And I've called you out.
But I reject that because I've sold like almost $1,000 worth of Lego, as my kids are now high school students and don't care. And I've been very aggressive trying to make space. Like if one thing comes in, two things goes out. That's topic number one.
All right.
Second topic is I was in Switzerland and last week, and I bought a watch to go with my other watch collection. So I got two nice watches here, and I'm going to give them to my sons when they graduate from high school in like nice boxes, nice Swiss watches.
Nice.
Mid-level watches. These are not watches that are worth more than my arm. But then I don't want to become Damian. I want to be a freaking 2-watch guy because I got all this great stuff happening on my Apple Watch. Yeah. But then I like this watch.
I gave up the dream of.
Do you have 2 watches on right now?
No, I just wear my mechanical watches now.
But
I don't
there's
wear
so much.
any watch.
I like getting texts on my wrist.
I don't like. I think I've gotten to the point where I kind of cringe every time I get an alert.
Well, blood sugar. I just get a
kind
blood
of
sugar alert as an example. You know.
Okay, so it is a trade-off because then you can glance and go like dismiss it and not worry about it. But it is true; it can be constant.
I mean, as I said on the Twitter about it, I would relish. I would be all over a product that was a smart band for a mechanical watch, which Mont Blanc made one generation of, and they had a second gen that was going to come out. Yeah,
people have always teased me about my relationship with Apple. But yeah, I get it. I want my fitness circles to close. And people are like, well, get an Aura smart ring or get a Whoop, whatever. But none of those things will close that freaking circle. And I'm addicted. My wife has closed that circle for 950 days.
It's pretty good.
You know what I mean? Like she's on the airplane at 2 a.m. going like this, trying to get her stand.
The things we care about is people just... Sometimes I just laugh at the absurdity of everything.
Well, it's a motivator. It is a motivator to get off your butt.
The fact that we're a species that needs motivating to look after ourselves.
Is just climate change, man. Climate change.
Yeah, well, exactly. Great segue.
What do you got?
You know what I think this is? I think that this is an FPGA Commodore 64 motherboard.
So explain the C64 recency. Like I've noticed you've been doing some C64 stuff very recently. I didn't know you were a Commodore guy at all.
So Okay, so my first computer, when I was a boy.
Is this the parents sold the truck
Yeah,
thing?
my parents.
It was a C64?
This is a real thing. My parents, my dad was a firefighter. My mom's a zookeeper. They're not technical people. They didn't go to college. And my fifth grade teacher let me use an Apple II once and said, this kid's got a knack for computers, and suggested that my parents buy one. And the cheapest computer they could find was a Commodore 64 at Sears for $300. But then it was $300 for the computer and $300 for the little 13-inch TV, and then another $250 for the printer. So you're looking at about $900.
Yeah.
And my dad had a big blue 1972 Ford Econoline van, and I came home one day, and that van was gone, and the computer had arrived from Sears.
Yeah.
And then a buddy of mine, Shashi Jain from Intel, recently found a Commodore 64 in the original box with the Sears tape. On the thing. So someone had the actual Sears tape with the Sears dollar amount on it. So I got nostalgic and I bought it from Shashi. It was very kind. And I have
people that don't know, like Sears was like the thing. It was like Amazon before there was Amazon.
Right? Oh,
you would flip through there for your holiday gifts, and it was
Sears was something
clothes from there. Yeah.
So as such, I've been trying to fix it. So what happened last week? I turned on the disk drive, the 1541 Commodore 64 disk drive, and a capacitor popped, which is something that happens with 40-year-old capacitors.
Yeah.
So I ordered a bunch of parts, and I've got somewhere in here, I've got some soldering iron stuff. One of these things.
So is the irony that by the time you get it working, it's going to cost as much as your parents paid for it?
Oh, it's stupid. Ago? Yeah, it's ridiculous. I'll be probably spending a couple $100 trying to get this thing to work. Right. So there you go. Soldering flux. Right. So there's the flux. So that's one of these packages.
Someone will have to explain to me the merits of using separate flux with fluxless solder rather than just using solder that has flux in its core. I know there's reasons. I have no idea why. I always just go the easy route with the very minimal soldering I have to do. I
believe it's for heat distribution. I'd have to check the comments on.
Yeah, probably more control if you're. Yeah. I have one of those cold solder guns, but I hate soldering.
Cold solder guns?
There's the soldering wick. This is a desoldering wick. So this is a braided copper braid.
Yeah.
And you heat it up.
Yep.
And then it sucks up.
So is that required for doing like finer work? Because I have a desolderer like suction pen thing, but I'm just doing crude soldering on like keyboards every now and then or something.
And I needed a 4.7 microfarads capacitor, so I had to buy 300 of them.
Which is ridiculous. I was like when I was fixing my radio control cars, like I need a washer, like I need one.
Yeah, there you go. It's a solder sucker. What do you got there?
Yeah, right.
So there's different kinds. This one, just the tip gets hot, and just when it's touching stuff. So you don't.
That sounds annoying.
Send me that.
Yeah.
Does it take a while once you touch it for it to get hot enough to melt it?
A little bit. Yeah, it's not crazy hot, but it's just the tip, and it does heat up pretty quick. So
okay.
It's funny. I used to love soldering, and then I've had just enough things that I've soldered that you spend hours on and they don't work, and then you're like, son of a,
It is kind of interesting that these computers are old enough that you can manually solder them like fairly straightforward fashion. Now I know there are people who are modding like RTX video cards and stuff. Like people do soldering, assuming it's a surface mount style. I think that the right one. But they typically have like microscopes and like tweezers, because the resistors and things are like minuscule.
Oh, it's tiny.
But it's kind of interesting that computers decades ago, they looked like the PCBs on them, like everything's chunky. You can really see that they were put together by hand.
Well, remember a couple weeks.
This keyboard behind me, it's a Korg MS-10.
Yeah,
and that was broken, and like during pandemic, that was one of my goals was to fix it. And I replaced the thing. But when I opened it up, it's like really big, chunky, like you said. It's like totally solderable. And I watched all these YouTube videos. I didn't have to replace electronics. I had to replace a key. Yeah. But all these YouTube videos, the guys were like, let's change out the pot on this. Let's,
Is that a breadboard, Hanselman?
This is Ben Eater's 6502 from flip flops, basically.
Oh, you made a CPU, right?
Basically. So I made. Yeah. This is the innards blown up and expressed in 7400 series and gates. And then this is and then these are your 8. This is your 8 bits. So this is a bus visualizer.
Yep.
That's the display output. And then the next step
LEDs.
after this is to write a display driver. And the way that you do that is there's an EEPROM here, and you actually have to burn the code onto the EEPROM. So every time I want to recode it, I have to take the chip off the board, put it on this chip burner, burn the thing, and then put the chip back on the deal.
Is this why they call you punch cards, Scott?
This is why they call me Mr. Punch Cards. And then I bought a tiny oscilloscope so then I can watch the voltage go up and down on the edge.
That's hardcore.
It is hardcore. But this is what I talk about when I say driving stick shift. We don't want to gatekeep. We don't want people to say you don't get to use C# until you learn assembler. Mm-hmm. But I have felt that as a driver, I'm using the car analogy, that I'm a better driver if I understand how to,
it's
drive
interesting, isn't it? You've used that analogy for a very long time, and I've even helped you on, work on talks that use that analogy and build upon it. And I do find myself asking the question though, I can see how folks react when you express it that way, that it is a form of gatekeeping, and it's difficult to know how can one express that learning a little bit about what's underneath without geeking out about it, because everything you just showed is like geeking out about it. You just have to own the fact that you're a total geek about that stuff, and that you're not advocating that people should geek out about this stuff like you do. And so it's hard, I guess, because I think I have gotten any knowledge I have about everything you just talked about, I literally probably got just from listening you to talk. I never did all that stuff that you're talking about. I didn't do computer science, and that's great. But I have this stupid ability that if I read or watch something, I can typically distill the salient bits that are useful for me and then retain them. And then regurgitate them in a talk or something else, hopefully in a relevant way, which makes, has the nice side effect of making it seem like I'm super knowledgeable and some things, but I don't really know. I've never done the thing that you just did, but I know what a register is. I know the basic thing about how a CPU works, even though I've never gotten close to reading a book.
You picked it up via osmosis.
What's that?
You picked it up via osmosis.
I picked it up via osmosis. And again, I not everyone can do that at all. Like some people, I'm not a good study. I'm not very good at reading books and studying and retaining stuff that way. I tend to pick up things more through observation and tactility, like doing things.
To your point about gatekeeping, if someone said you have to build your computer from scratch, that's gatekeeping. Mm-hmm. But what I'm trying to do is say, did you know this thing existed, and what fun you'll have if you spend some time. Like you like driving, try building a kit car from scratch. And if someone says, "Oh my gosh, that sounds super fun," then they should do that. But if someone doesn't like that, then don't do that.
I get that, but I think the other thing I keep bumping on when we talk about this is, I think there's a lot of people in our industry, like a lot, maybe the majority of people in our industry, and I mean software development in general, that don't care about any of this stuff. They're not. They're not computer people in the sense that they're not doing anything outside of their work hours, and so that's
fine too.
That I see it, there's a danger that you do build up this idea of a persona that is good for programming, and it's one that wants to do this type of stuff outside of work. And so it's an interesting balance. Like I can understand why people get a little iffy on it.
I've been thinking about this more. I've been part of this military mentoring group, and it's people getting out of the military and getting into technology things. And Microsoft sponsors this thing. A lot of people have programs for this, but and so it's like a 4-month course or whatever, and we have an hour with them every Friday. And so I've done 3 of these, and each group has like 15 or so people that I'll interact with. And I would say it's a split. Like each one, it's about half and half. There are some that really get into the syntax. They get into they want to know how and why everything works. They really and there are other people that are like put off by that and feel like, and so a lot of it, like every single time it's like, how much math do I need to know? How much, and it's so great to be able to say, hey, if that helps you approach it, if you like math, that's a great way to attach to this. If you don't worry about it. Like, like there's plenty you can do without math.
Right.
Day-to-day programming,
That's interesting. Like, it makes me wonder whether, like, I'm just thinking about my own journey. It makes me wonder whether and there's some comments here about this is why diversity is so key in when we talk about our industry. I wonder whether whether it would be more beneficial, maybe I just haven't seen it, to better visualize and discuss and talk about the many, many paths that people take to our industry. I did math in high school. I liked math in high school. I did super advanced math, as pretty much as advanced as you do in high school, and then didn't do any math in college because I didn't complete my undergrad.
Interesting. I barely survived calculus.
Right. So I loved math in high school. Did very well. And that, as I said, didn't do anything further. And, now I kind of just know enough to, when I need to do some math in my programming job, which is rarely, like, I'm not doing graphics or anything like that, but if I need to understand some basic stuff, like string manipulation, I have to like add indexes and things. I still get it wrong all the time. But like beyond that, it's just useful for understanding some things, right?
Yeah.
But I still struggled with stats and things like that. And like even the stuff I do in my day job today, some stats has become a lot more important in the discussion of product management as a discipline in the past few years, simply because there's a lot more use of data to try and inform decisions and strategy and that type of thing. And that inevitably leads to, can you predict what's going to happen, or how significant is this data point versus that data point? And I just kind of throw my hands up at that point and say, I'm not going to go, and I don't want to go and learn stats. I don't want to go and do that type of discipline. Go talk to a data scientist. Like, we have those people. But it is an interesting thought to think about the different journeys we all took to get to where we are now. And then the one thing that obviously all three of us on this call have that anyone that we're talking to doesn't have is time in this industry. And there's just no replacement for that. And I kind of, that's another one that I struggle with, how to articulate, because people will often ask, as they do naturally, oh, they see you do something and it looks like you're fairly good at it. How do I learn about that? How did you get so good at XYZ? And it's like, well, I've been doing it a long time.
Yeah. Well, but the real skill that I'm trying to teach my kids, this morning was the first day of school, and I now have two high schoolers, is to not be afraid to explore a topic if it feeds your spirit. So, if you're interested in something, run down that road. Like, all I'm doing is being excited about stuff in public. If you don't like that, that's cool, right? Yeah. But you hear about, like, oh, this 15-year-old learned about a new enzyme and then they're going to cure cancer. That's because someone encouraged them to run down a road that they were excited about. One of the things that I'm really excited about right now are bridges between the modern and the non-modern. So 2 examples as I've been unpacking my crap here.
Yeah. It's an unboxing video.
This is a 9-pin serial port.
How do we do this? Wait, no. How do I? Oh, so I'm trying to get you full. Well,
John, it's great that we can see how enthusiastic you are when you call yourself.
Thumbs up. Yeah, I don't know. Oh, there it is. Okay.
Okay. Yep.
Right.
RS232. Is that right?
Yeah. But this is the standard for joysticks on the Atari 2600.
Yep.
And that's a USB
oh, wow.
adapter. So you can plug in a HID device and have it show up as a joystick, which I think is freaking cool.
That's pretty awesome.
Stupid, right? Yeah. That's thing number one, right? So I just got that from a gentleman in Poland at retrohacks.net. This is a DIN, very popular connector, and you can actually test the voltage on each one of these and see what's going on. And this is a DIN to S video.
Yep.
And audio.
Yep.
So that is the proprietary but still DIN connector for a Commodore 64, and that splits it out into S video and audio. And then I have to go and turn that into HDMI. Right? And that could have gone to SCART or to composite, but S video separates.
SCART? It was SCART growing up for me.
SCART? We didn't have that here in the US, so I don't know how to pronounce it. No one in the US.
I don't even know what you're talking about.
So SCART or SCART, I can't say SCART, sorry. SCART was a European connector, and it's a very long, very chunky, sort of with very thin but flat, long pins, AV connector. And it is asymmetrical, so you can only plug it in one way, which is kind of cool. And it was popular on devices that wanted higher quality video because it uses so many pins. It separates, especially when you compare it to like RCA, right? Like the yellow video that it separated. My understanding is it would separate out the RGB or the luminance, saturation and whatever the other one is, signals into different pins. Plus audio could go out on other pins in a single connector, so it was higher quality. Yeah.
And what's cool about these Commodore 64 cables is that you can just make one of these. You can literally just say, this is pin, it's not pin, I don't know the right word for it. It's not pin compatible with S-Video, but the luminance and the chrominance are on these two pins.
Signal compatible.
They're signal compatible, right? Yep. So this is really just in the middle somewhere. They just connect these two pins to these two pins and they swap out the audio. So that's a thing that just came in the mail. And then I'm going to plug that into this, which will then get me HDMI.
Nice.
Right? So that's one thing. And then on the joystick side, is anyone old enough to remember this? This is
it looks familiar.
The Epix joystick for doing summer games.
So you know what we did for summer games? So I remember in the arcade, there were the kids who were really good at the button mashing. They used the back end of a Bic cigarette lighter.
Yeah. And
they would roll it over the button like this. And that was how they got the really, really fast button clicks.
So that came. So here, my buddy Peter Morris in the UK, who you know, John, is running Blazer University, sent me a gift.
Oh, wow.
Okay, you ready
Peter's
for this?
Awesome, by the way. He does so much cool stuff.
Oh, yeah, no, he's a Peter Morris. Shout out to Peter. I'm going to do a unboxing video later.
Oh, Ninja Gaiden. Is it?
No, this is even older.
Just Ninja.
This is the last Ninja.
Oh.
On cassette.
On C64 cassette.
Wow.
He found this cache of Commodore 64 games on cassette. Wow. And this is actually like a one-way modem. If you play it, you're hearing the modem screaming, and then that downloads the bits onto the computer. So he sent me an inbox copy of The Last Ninja, which was very, very kind of him.
That was some of my first programs on TRS-80. My friend had a TRS-80. I'd ride my bike to his house, and he had a cassette tape. And so you'd write your program and save it out to the tape.
Oh, it's so good. So then here's the Commodore 64 I'm currently working on. Okay. Yep. Now this is an original C64 with a 40-year-old motherboard, and at some point it'll die. At some point it'll pop. At some point something bad will happen, and I'll be sad. And there's a whole group of folks like Adrian's Digital Basement, where he like sits there with an oscilloscope and fixes these things, and he's like, that popped and that popped. My abilities are, not that good. I think I can fix that 1541 disk drive, but I may give up. But that what's called a bread bin, that brown box, is called a bread bin. This fella has made a thing called the C64 Ultimate. This just came in the mail, and what this is it is a motherboard swap, brand new motherboard swap for the Ultimate C64. So it is an FPGA re-implementation of the Commodore 64.
This is what just arrived?
With HDMI.
Oh my Lord.
Ethernet, USB, and the actual pins, right? This is important. This is not an emulator, right? It's an FPGA re-implementation. So it's an emulator of sorts, but it's a hardware emulator. And it's cycle perfect and complete. And then I can load because moving parts, right? I can load disk images and lie to it about that 1541 existing, and then load stuff off of SD cards. But because it's a hardware emulator, these two things are here. I can take the actual SID chip, which some people believe can't be emulated well, and use the original SID chips on this to get the audio just like
perfect.
The perfect way.
So two thoughts occur to me right now. One, if you didn't realize by now, Hanselman doesn't do anything by halves. Two, the fact that these exist, for anyone who was watching this and going, like, how can this be a thing? Yep, very nice.
That's the little bubble that goes on the top of it.
There are enough people into this thing that these devices exist. So just think about that for a moment. This isn't like
this is an industry.
This can't be super niche, like, because there are enough people who care about this that someone is mass producing FPGA-based ultimate Commodore 64s.
This is 40. How old is Commodore 64?
40 years old this year.
Wow. It's funny talking to my kids now, and they're talking about the 80s like I thought of the 50s when I was growing up.
I had that exact thought yesterday, actually. Like, thinking back to when in the 80s when I was a child, and even the 90s as a teenager, and thinking how far back the 70s and the 60s felt, especially because I'm listening to so much Beatles and stuff at the moment.
Oh yeah.
And now it's like, oh my God, it's like, that's literally what it feels like. The other thing that occurred to me was how people's, folks of our age who went through the computer sort of generations that are being talked about here, how different those paths can be based on where you were in the world. Because the Commodore 64 was not the dominant platform in other parts of the world. And indeed, there was quite a lot of, depending on what set of years you were active at the time, there was a lot of iteration and a lot of sort of new stuff that came out in a short period of time. And so you may, depending on kind of where you paged in, and whether you were exposed at school versus whether you were exposed maybe at college or personally, at a personal interest, you may have got different things, because schools traditionally would upgrade very slowly. And so you may have computers that were 10 years old. So like, for those from the Commonwealth, from UK derived culture, they're probably more familiar with things like the ZX Spectrum and Amstrad and the BBC Micro line of personal computing. Whereas those in the American sort of side of it are probably were exposed to the Ataris, the Commodores. What did you mention before, John? You had another one.
TRS-80.
TRS-80s.
Yeah.
And some of us were in cultures that got a lot of both. So like in Australia, it was primary school for me, elementary school. So like 5th grade and 6th grade, computer lab had Apple IIs, Apple II GSs, and a Mac, right? And so that's what we were exposed to at school. But as soon as I got to high school, I went to high school in England, then came back and did the rest of high school in Australia. They were using BBC Micros.
Now, when you say BBC Micro, is that actually like BBC, British Broadcasting Corporation?
No, so the same way that the Raspberry Pi is made by is a BBC device, as I understand it, and the company ARM. Yeah, okay. So the company ARM made the BBC Micro, is my understanding. Okay. And so someone who was more knowledgeable in the history of those devices, of which there are numerous, or you could just go to Wikipedia and look it up.
Throw that up.
Yeah, so that's the BBC Micro, and it was, and you can see the owl in the top right-hand corner. So that was the Acorn Computer Company. So ARM actually stands for, I think it's the Acorn RISC Machine is what ARM stands for, if I'm remembering this correctly. Advanced RISC Machine. There you go. And it was made by Acorn. Yeah. And so I was exposed to this line of computers a lot more than I was the C64 side of things, and then the Atari, and then the what was it, the Amiga after that. And the VIC-20 was the competitor to the Amiga, and so there were these different lineages depending on kind of where you grew up in the world.
And you all had ZX Spectrums, and we never saw ZX Spectrums.
Yeah, so the Spectrums and the Amstrads and those things
from Radio Shack.
Yep.
Tandy.
Yeah.
Ooh, I have two more things before I forget. Remember that DIN connector?
Yeah.
This is DIN to USB, and it's called a Zoom floppy, 3D printed custom firmware that allows you to plug a 1541 disk drive to read floppies like this on a PC.
Yep.
And that's how I'm going to take all these dozens of floppies and archive them. But then when I plug that in, it burst into flames, and that's why that was a problem.
Did you notch out the sides so you can flip the discs over, though?
It's true. And then this is freaking genius. This is amazing. This is 3D printed. Again, this is a cottage industry, like Damian pointed out. That's a cartridge that plugs into the back of the Commodore 64. And inside is a freaking Raspberry Pi. This is called a Pi 1541. And it is a cycle accurate fake disk drive powered by a Raspberry Pi. So rather than this person building their own whole microcontroller,
really
they just
smart.
run it on a
What
Pi.
I love is how much power you need in a CPU-based device to clock
fake
emulate these 40-year-old devices. It's so much power required to do that.
Yep. And then they even put a little screen on it. So it's got a little OLED, not an LCD, but an OLED screen with up-down buttons. So then you can actually pick discs and swap discs out. And that's all sitting on an SD card. So that's useful because now things aren't spinning, right?
Yeah.
So, Who says globalization hasn't given us anything? Because none of this would have been possible. Like, if it, we need to acknowledge the fact that the 3D printers have made a bunch of this obviously possible, but obviously in crazily cheap manufacturing of electronics obviously has made a lot of this possible.
Off the shelf 3D printed parts here. And I just love that there's some, like, again, globalization is a challenge, but there's some very nice dude in Poland, and I PayPal'd him $35 and a freaking USB to DIN connector showed up, or a joystick. I got that on eBay. So I'm into this probably for kind of $150 right now, but it's going to add up. And then this little guy, and it's actually like vacuum sealed into a, like, you can see it's like he just shrunk wrapped it.
Yep.
I think that's so cool.
Seeing all these different connectors is reminding me, I was going through stuff recently and how many different connectors we used to have. And now, like, we complain about it, but you basically have like USB based chargers for just about everything now. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, there's just,
and again, those of us who have gone through this lineage of pre-USB, or even pre-PS2, like the first computers I had didn't even have PS2, and then watched the connectors sort of rationalize themselves over time to what is now eventually essentially serial for everything. Your video has a connector type, but even then you can do that over USB-C now because they seem to be converging. But back in the day, and then also back in the day, we just had a serial port and a parallel port. And the parallel port was faster than the serial port because it went in parallel.
And the parallel port was for printers only.
Yes,
we would just
and
shove
then
things into it.
And even inside the computer, you had you had parallel connectors for your hard drives, and then we moved to serial connectors, serial ATA connectors, and that just always lived in my brain. It's like, how is serial faster than parallel? and then now, of course, everything is pretty much the connector is totally separate from the protocol, largely for a lot of these things, and it's somewhat interchangeable depending on the form factor. So I was redoing my charging station in the kitchen this week, actually, because the kids have got laptops for schools and all that type of stuff. And I'm at the point where I had to buy 2 of those new gallium nitride anchor chargers have the 2 USB-C and a USB. I know, Hanselman, you got one of those too. They're on special on Amazon this week.
I got a bunch of them. Yeah.
And you can take up 2 power outlets and get like 4 power delivery USB-C connectors that can do 65 watts plus a couple of USB-As, and that's managing to bring everything back down into a realm of approachability again. But it's getting a little bomb. But the fact that so much can do USB-C, because like the Oculus VR is there, and all the battery packs and wireless headphones get charged there, and it Kindles, and it's all USB-C, and like anything that isn't USB-C like gets looked at with a strange face now, because it's the one thing that keeps you from completely going to USB-C, which I'm very grateful for.
I've got a few, like recently I switched from cords to just little adapters, USB-C to USB-A or USB, whatever, the old other USB charge types.
Yeah.
I realized I had a bunch of cords. I'm like, I don't need the cords. I just need the tip to change.
Someone just commented, the average age of participants in this live is at least 45 years old, isn't it? I don't know if they're referring to us. I think the average age is actually higher than 45 if you look at the 3 of us. But the average age of the people watching, I don't know if that's 45 or not. But that is, It is. I mean, it does make you wonder. Like going back to this whole, knowing a little bit about the layers underneath and using that to be, quote unquote better. As Hanselman said, I'm a better driver because I know how to drive stick, which is obviously arguable. It is interesting to think about as we think about teaching, which is obviously your job, Scott and John. That's what you do at Microsoft. Is you're in the division for .NET and other parts of DevDiv that teach what we do, basically. It's a very interesting thought to think about how we convey this to new folks without any of this context, because it's hard. We can't separate our history and our knowledge that we've accumulated over that history from how we approach and how we learn new stuff. It's just impossible to do that. And so
I recognize that there are going to be people that are going to look at this and say, it's a bunch of old people. That's cool, but there are still, and I'm looking in the chat here, there's some 26-year-olds and 24-year-olds. I showed you that one gentleman's website, Pikuma.com, where he's actually teaching 6502 assembler in emulators. Video games and assembler is something you can pick up in a couple of weeks. Things like the Pico 8 are an entirely self-contained, reimagination of a retro arcade. There is an argument that spending a couple of weeks learning this stuff just to fill in the gaps will make you a better JavaScript programmer.
The thing I bump on is that I don't know how much interest there is in doing what you just said. Like people at our age, when those things were interested, and people who that technology was relevant to in their formative years were interested at the time because it was relevant, or now because it's nostalgic or whatever. But I do question, I wonder how relevant that is and how interested folks might be when the type of technology they're exposed to is so different, is so fundamentally different on the consumption side.
Yeah, I gotta agree there, and apologies if I cut you off too early, but like I'm seeing, as I'm talking to both younger people that I'm mentoring with this military thing and also just my kids, that they will like the way, so there's several like fundamental changes going from this very kind of hardware low level. You did need to, it was like a car where you could take it apart and change parts or whatever. Now you've got everything like, your phones are sealed up, more and more devices are sealed up. You're not going to open up your laptop and change anything in it. And, some huge like mental shifts for me recently was reading some of the stuff and talking to my kids about that they search on TikTok before they search on Google for a lot of stuff. And for me, that was like, what? How does that even make any sense? Like, it's consumption. And they're like, no, I can get a 1-minute video. I can get it like it's like tailored for, it knows me because of my feed and all this stuff. If I want to search for like a recipe or how to do my nails or whatever, I've got daughters, but it's like it's gonna like take me right to something as opposed to like going through Google. What, I got to get on a computer or like scroll through stuff, and like
even like it just occurs to me, like even all the electronic devices I was exposed to growing up took disposable batteries, right? Like you were actively involved in making the thing work. You had to open it, put batteries in it, close it up, sometimes turn on an internal switch to get the thing working. Now think of the vast majority of electronics that people are exposed to have built-in have built-in rechargeable batteries. You never see the inside. You just plug it in and charge it. That idea was very foreign to us back in the day. We would very much have to get in there, and you would buy, just like folks do today, rechargeable batteries. If you could afford them, but and get them, big bulky chargers to charge them. But otherwise, you were generally you're opening the thing to put batteries in it every now, quite regularly.
It's funny how like the terms too, like USB often now means charge, when before it was a connector.
That's a good point.
Another thing like that is Wi-Fi. People will be on their phone and be like, "I'm not getting any Wi-Fi here." Yeah,
my kids are like that. They don't understand the separation between internet, data, Wi-Fi, network, cellular act. They have no concept of all of that. And I try to explain it. It's hard enough trying to get them to remember, micro USB versus USB-C, or God forbid, USB-C at 45 watts versus USB-C at 15 watts. Forget about it. Like, no idea.
Yesterday, I plugged in I was on my Switch. I was sitting on the floor. My wife was watching TV. I'm on the Switch. I needed to charge. It pops up the low battery thing. I grab a random USB cable. I plug it into a random Anchor. Nothing happens.
Mm-hmm.
And then a couple minutes later, I go look on this guy I know on Twitter who works on the Chromebook. They recently added a feature on the Chromebook where they have some internal database of cables and can determine that this cable is not going to support the thing you want to do. So you plug the cable in and it goes and it says, I don't think this is going to support display. So apparently I had some random, and it was a thin cable. I knew it didn't feel quality and it wasn't able to pass the power from the Anchor over to the thing.
That's interesting.
The result was it did nothing, but it didn't tell me. And the Chromebook guy was saying that Windows and Mac should get on board.
They should.
And be part of the negotiation. Because right now, USB-C chipsets negotiate with the operating system, but the cable is ignored.
Right.
And he's saying the cable has lots of information it can share about manufacturer.
How does the cable share that information? Is it active?
Don't know.
I assume it's not active. I've run into this before. I had my webcam for a while. For some reason, it wasn't connecting I forget. It was a charger or a webcam or something, and it turned out it was the cable, and it was like really frustrating. It was screen sharing from my Mac, and it was just like wouldn't work. So and it all came down to I had to upgrade this cable, and then all of a sudden it's like
I've only got a couple where I've had that with USB-C. Just for power even. It gets a lot more complicated once you get to data because then the pins matter. Like how many pins have you got? But I'm curious as to like how two USB-C devices like a power source and a device or whatnot negotiate whether the cable can support the wattage. Like that would be amazing. I don't know how that works. Like that might be pin based as well because they probably need to use more pins in order to send higher power ratings is my guess. I'd have to go and look at the USB-C standard, the power delivery standard. But how, like, I admit this occurred to me over the weekend. I took a USB-C cable that originally came with like a Pixel phone. So it would have been 15 watt charging. And I plugged it into a new Lenovo, which is a 45 watt charging device into the Anchor. And it worked, like it started charging. And I'm like, and I'm a little concerned. I'm like, is it going to get is that cable going to like explode or something? Or how does it protect against that?
I bought these mag, like basically USB-C. People think that the big problem with USB-C is they don't have MagSafe. So it's because you
I've seen those adapters you can
destroy the laptop, right? Yeah. So you plug in this little thing and it sticks off like a little zit on the, and then you magnet onto the thing. Yeah. So I'm like, this is it. So I buy $8 and they say 120 watts and I plug them all into my Surface and my iPad and whatever. So I plug the thing into my iPad and I start getting phantom touches, phantom keyboards and stuff.
Oh dear.
Something ain't right. And something's crossing the streams. And now I had to pull it out of the iPad because it was touching this. It was sending signals that were not the signals that we needed to have.
It's probably sending all your touches and keystrokes back to some.
We actually had some comments about security, and it actually did make, like, obviously, Scott, this is for like playing games, like, whatever. But it is interesting as you start to think about these like off the shelf and custom printed parts. I read a thing a long time ago where it was like there was like some sort of Chinese they basically like through a shell company bid to replace the clothing irons in a hotel in Washington DC, and all of these irons had a chip. They were listening and uploading and all this stuff. It's like crazy thinking how like any kind of electronics now, because it's micro. You know what I mean? It's a miniaturized. It's like, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, there's been a few like bogeyman kind of articles. It was that famous one, right? A couple of years ago where they claimed that a motherboard had a chip on it that was vulnerable. And I think that never got proven. And in fact, I think it was disproven.
I have a bunch of USB condoms because, you're at the airport or whatever.
Do you trust the maker of said device though?
And that,
I mean,
I do.
Point,
whenever I'm at a 7-Eleven or like a bodega, I pull on the credit card skimmer.
Oh, my son does that too. Like he likes the fact that it's almost like it gives him public permission to go and like yank on things. No, you have to do this to check for skimmers, because he sees that stuff on TikTok and YouTube as well. Like, I think there's a lot of that type of stuff. But John makes a good point. Like, as things become a lot smaller and embedded, and a lot more things are talking to other things, it's the protocols. Obviously, a lot of them have built-in support for security and whatnot. But again, if anyone who's ever done any kind of real security analysis, like in terms of trying to identify the various threat actors and vectors and stuff like that, like there's so many variables now to consider. It's virtually impossible for any lay person or even regular person, even us, like in our day to day, to be able to fully protect against things, especially when the most effective forms of security intrusion at the moment or breach are social engineering based attacks, or mass kind of exposure through database dumps, usually, and like mistakes, far more prevalent, it seems, than actual directed attacks at a specific person.
Should I share your screen, Scott?
Yeah, share my screen real quick, because I just added Damian on Twitter. So I said, how many of you young coders, new coders of Twitter, are interested in the internals of computers, like learning assembly or C, making you a better JavaScript dev? Going one level deeper, is it interesting? And then fortunately, we just got tweeted by Code Newbie, which is all early in career. So I know the concern, Damian, you would have would be that only old people follow my Twitter. So Code Newbies is mostly early in career folks. A lot of really good, well-rounded stuff in here. Someone saying they're learning .NET and they had to go one level deeper to learn something. Another person said it's not about assembly or C, it's just about fundamental concepts that are bigger than the language. So knowing that a CPU is a thing, knowing that memory pressure is a thing, knowing that parallelism is a thing. Here's an individual playing around with printline and learning about heap allocation. Another person saying that I don't care, I just want to press F5 and just have it work.
Yep.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So very well-rounded stuff here. Knowing relative latencies of things. I thought that was a really good one.
That's a good one. I mean, there's the famous Grace Hopper example of that one as well.
And then a reference to the new book by Charles Petzold, Code, which is wonderful. You notice here he's got the word code written in ASCII. He's got it written in Morse code.
Morse as well.
He's got it written in Braille.
Nice.
And this book, I tweeted about it and I'll retweet about it, starts with two little kids, best friends, across from each other, trying to figure out how to flash lights to each other to communicate. And then in the process, they develop Morse code. He talks about, this doesn't work, that doesn't work. He talks about the anatomy of a flashlight. And then by the end of the book, you are building an 8086. And does it make you a better programmer? No, but I do think there's something to be said for this. And so this is an international bestseller. There's value in that.
I feel like there's, and I don't know if it's like left brain, right brain. I've heard people disprove that, but whatever. There's different ways people think. There's auditory, visual. And I feel like some people,
which is completely debunked, by the way. I have to say it, but anyway.
I mean,
but
this is such a left brain thing to say.
The general. Okay, so you're such a Scorpio, Scott. I
mean, you win.
I'm an Aquarius, but thank you.
But people do have different mental models how they approach the world, and I feel for some people that's really empowering to be able to be like, I'm approaching this thing, and I really don't feel like I get it until I can grab onto it by learning the internals, right? And then there are other people that just see that as, even if you don't approach it in a gatekeeping way, they hear it. They're like, this is confusing and scary to me, and I don't want to do this. Like, but the same person, you can say, here's a website, log in here and change your name, change this. Okay, that stuff's stored in a database. Do you want to see where, you know what I mean? And it's like you start with the kind of top level and work your way down as you need it. It's more JIT learning.
I like that.
I just want to say something on this topic before you jump in, Scott. I find myself reflecting back on my own sort of experience, and I have notoriously always resisted learning new things deliberately. I know Scott is very much an advocate of deliberate learning and deliberate living. Intentional is the word he uses rather than deliberate. And I have always been really bad at that. I said before, I'm not a great study. I do get joy out of organizing things and stuff. There's something that's a different thing. But when it comes to like, I'm going to go and learn X because that's going to make me a better, like, blah, I'm asleep already. Like, just forget about it. No hope in hell that I'm going to do that type of stuff. I think looking back, I would say that the things that I've learned, the knowledge I've gained, I've gotten through necessity. It's through exposure. I am the sort of person, I think I alluded to this before, I learn through exposure. Like if I see something or if I have to do something, I'm exposed to it in any way, even if it's part of a captive audience, maybe, then that's when I'll take it on board. But I'm generally not going to seek it out unless it's one of those rare things that tickles me for whatever reason it might be, right? And to your point, John, there are just different people. Like people just, there are going to be people like that who are then lucky enough that they have whatever mental stuff they were gifted with, that works for them. They can get exposed to stuff, they can take it on board, they can see the relation to something they already know, and they can build on top of it. Not everyone can do that easily. Some people have to study really hard and do rote learning and do repetition to make things stick because their brain just doesn't see the patterns in that topic. They see it in other stuff. They lean a different way for whatever reason. And I think we have to keep acknowledging that. Like I think there is a danger again in holding up what are perhaps exceptional examples, and I don't think we say this enough either. There seems to be a bit of a resistance to acknowledging that there are exceptional people, and like the 15-year-old who learned a new enzyme, Scott, that's exceptional. That is not typical, and we have to be careful using those as examples to advocate for doing a thing, because that's literally the one in a million. And we shouldn't be setting people up to think that they can compare to that, or they should be like that, or I expect that in any way.
And if you're
that's
not,
even possible.
you can't do it, right?
Right, they can't do it. I can't do that. I would not have been able to do that. Am I better than other people? Sure, by some measures, and terrible in others. Like, even saying better that's why I put in quotes, because it's horribly loaded, right? But we do have to acknowledge that certain ways of learning, certain ways of building this knowledge and understanding certain levels, there are levels of that. And there are differences between different kinds of people, and we have to figure out the best way of helping these people on board.
Yeah, I agree with you that, we are being a little hypersensitive in these days, which we probably should be. You shouldn't be saying better or big qualitative terms. But going back to Ben Eater, who's 6502 from scratch solution that I built, he is demonstrably deeper in his understanding of computers as we have taken a rock, infused it with lightning, and taught it to think. And I still, 40 years after learning it, don't quite understand electrons and resistance and stuff like that. You know what I mean? Yeah. So is he better? It's up to you in 2022 if you want to say that word. But he certainly has a far deeper insight into what's really going on. And if you press F12 inside of Chrome or Edge and you say, that's the metal, you are acknowledging, you're accepting that you're floating on this, the shoulders of giants, and there's a lot deeper. Am I saying you need to go all the way down to a rock infused with lightning? No, but I think it comes down to algorithms and latencies and things like that. It comes down to systems thinking. True story, a stupid story, and I have to go. I'm at the Retro Game Trader yesterday, and I'm trying to buy some games, and I'm going to use my in-store credit. And I have a large credit because I recently sold a Game Boy in the box original with Tetris. So I figure I got a couple $100 credit here. And I go in there and the guy says, here's some Switch games. And I see that you have an $18 credit. And I was like, freaking out. They've lost my credit. They've forgotten my credit. And he goes, I was in here. And I said, how am I going to explain to a random dude at a random store that, no, you owe me $400, right? He's going to think I'm a scammer, right? So he's like, I don't know. It's not in the database. And we're stuck. So not thinking about assembly, not thinking about C, but thinking about systems thinking. I say, can you track when I came in? He says, no, those are all on a sheet of paper. And I said, okay, when did you last get a Game Boy original in the box with Tetris? Oh, let me check. Oh, well, one of those came in on August 6th. Okay, cool. Where did that come from? Oh, well, someone named Scott. Oh, okay. I'm Scott. was that applied to an account? Oh, it was applied to this account. Oh, and then we find out he got the phone number wrong, right? But if I hadn't known how systems work and databases and stuff to have come up with that backwards database query, I would have been out a couple.
Can I go one level deeper? Like I would always, to go one level deeper than that, I would just call that logical thinking. And I think
it's called systems thinking because
I appreciate that, but I think I think if you were to try like people say, oh, physics is ultimately a derivation of math, and math is the ultimate form of science. Like I think we all grew up being told that some people are just they're logic thinkers. Some people think logically about everything. They don't think emotionally about things. And there are different types of people, and there are different types of thinking within a single person. And you can be thinking emotionally about something rather than logically. And I think it still feels to this day that there is something to that. I know that sometimes I'm feeling emotional and thinking emotionally about something rather than stopping and thinking logically about it. And I think that there are people who are more inclined to naturally think logically about things rather than emotionally, and vice versa. And they have to work harder to think one way versus the other. And if that is true, then why can't it, as an extension of that, why can it not also be true that when learning a system that is an area of knowledge that is fundamentally logic based,
right?
Like everything we do in computers is ultimately, like you said, teaching rocks to think. From there on is all about logic.
Yeah.
It would be more difficult for someone who was more inclined to think emotionally about something than they are logically about something, and vice versa.
So when I returned to my car, my wife's reaction to me almost losing $400 was very visceral. And I think that her reaction would have been a much more, this is, like it would have been a very emotional reaction. Why did I not have, I didn't have any vibe like that. I was like, puzzle.
Yeah.
You mean like I should have been like, my money's gone.
Yeah.
Instead I was like, aha, get the little gray cells, and I want to, how can I solve this mystery puzzle? I've been given a gift this Saturday afternoon.
Right.
A puzzle. I think that can be taught. Would you agree? Because we should at least end on an agreement, Damian.
I think anyone can be taught anything ultimately. Broadly speaking, right? And we're brushing with incredibly broad strokes here, right? But I think also that there are going to be differences. Some people are going to find things much easier than other people for any given topic.
And going way back to that comment, diversity is key, because having an approach, like problem solving, getting a bunch of different, like all of us, it's kind of bizarre that all of us have these brain cells that like figure out and map all these connections and learn how to, and like, I've read books. Oliver Sacks had a book about like, somebody had like a brain injury and their brain rerouted to be able to see, even though, all these things. So I think that all of us think differently, like we all do. And so like getting multiple people on a problem, I mean, that's why we have meetings.
That's true. Getting multiple people on the problem. Right. And of course, we say this as, three white dudes of a certain age who kind of grew up in a Western culture.
Yeah.
But I have absolutely found that just having people who didn't go to my same school, who didn't grow up in my same place, who grew up speaking a different language, I'll call folks and I'll say, I'm having a problem with a piece of code. And just in the explaining it and then coming at it with a totally different direction, I'll be like, oh, that's why we have teams that aren't just the same people who went to the same college.
Yeah.
It's also, and it's also why we have levels. Like, I mean, we don't pay everyone at the same rate in a single team. Typically, you have diversity of experience in a team as well. And as you get more experience, you tend to see changes in your title, in your career, in your remuneration. There's a reason for those things, because as you take on experience, and Scott, you famously have said, if you don't take the same year of experience on every year. You want to take different experience on. So you've got 10 years of experience, not 1 year of experience 10 times over. When you do that, you absorb and you get, better at things. And then as you said, that's a level of perspective and diversity that we bring as well. Because often that's not to say that those people always solve the problems quicker or in the best possible way. Absolutely not. Sometimes the key insight will come not from a senior person at all, because it needed a different way of looking at it or thinking. But we need that diversity no matter what level we're talking about to enable us all to work better at these things. But yeah, I think it's important that we acknowledge these differences, though, because when it comes to teaching a new generation, which is something we're talking, I listened to a podcast about the impending cataclysm of CPAs aging out of the industry this week. I don't know if you've read about this. Is that it's like 3/4 of CPAs in America are set to retire in the next 10 to 15 years or something because they're all baby boomers. And so they were discussing the challenges as an industry and the importance of that role in the American financial system and some of the things that they're thinking about when it comes to trying to improve it. And I couldn't help but relate that to our industry and thinking very similar things about how much runs on these certified
public accountants.
Certified public. So
the acronym might be different in Australia than it is here. But a CPA here is legally allowed to do things like audits of a company, of a registered company, and things like that, and that they require more training and an entrance exam to be passed than just just an accountant, right? So anyway, I couldn't help but relate that to our industry, and I imagine, we joke about Fortran developers and COBOL and stuff that's been around forever, but the world runs on it, right? And it's like, well, any tech that you're touching today could well be that tech in a couple of decades.
I just helped upgrade the Planet Xamarin site from MVC 5 to ASP.NET Core, and I used the new tooling. I used all the new migration tooling, system web adapters.
It works really well.
Yeah,
it was amazingly awesome, and it also, looking at stuff, was like, oh man, app start folder, and this is in global ASAX, and all these brush off the cobwebs.
Yep. But now it is important that we figure out how to ensure that we can keep the pipeline of new developers coming through and making this industry as appealing as possible to as many people as possible.
Well, that is also a reminder that there's this window of generations, and the oldest person's 100 and something years old. So all knowledge expires every 100 years as we move farther and farther over. So there's someone who needs to know how to make nuclear plants, and there's somebody who needs to know how to make this and make that. So, you watch those guys
with space flight, right? Some of these old rockets, and they're like, we need replacement parts, or we need things for old. And they're like, the knowledge of how to actually run this equipment is gone. Like that was the thing that came up in The Martian, I think, or something. It's like, how do we get this together? So,
especially for knowledge that is tacit in nature, like stuff that's not written down, or is the type of thing that if you know it through experience or whatever it is, rather than, or it's an innate sort of a bias that you have or inclination that you have. Or a logical leap that you make because of the way that you think. That stuff is built up a lot of the time, over time, and is very hard to replace, very difficult to replace, right? And you talk about explicit versus tacit knowledge, but our industry is full of that. As it is now aging to the point where the first generation of programmers has retired or is about to retire. Maybe it's more the second generation now. The first generation probably already retired. We are probably having to deal with that as an industry more, for the first time, and other industries have been dealing with that for a long time. Maybe this is maybe we'll see a change. Maybe we'll have to learn new ways of documenting stuff and passing knowledge on, so that we don't have these types of epochs where we suddenly lose all the capability of supporting stuff from the past.
Yeah.
All right, I got to go to a meeting. I don't know when this show ends or not, but
when it ends now, I guess, because you're going.
So
it's fine to end now. That's whatever.
Certainly for those people who are just now tuning in, you missed an hour of random. But
Scott,
there
are
those who liked this style of chat. And if you like this, maybe we need to do this once a month or something, John.
I'm up for once a month.
Yeah, I'll pick you guys.
We don't do this enough, so maybe sign us up. I've always got something on my desk to share.
Awesome. We've got a Visual Studio Toolbox coming up. I think Mads Christensen's going to be on. They're going to be looking at what's new in Visual Studio 17.3. So that's a cool thing. And awesome. Great. Great to have everyone on. This is
great to be here again. I do miss this myself. I like participating in these as much as some folks seem to like watching them. So
cool.
Very cool. All right. Well,
catch you later, guys.
All right.
Catch ya.